Come on in, pull up a chair and take a load off because today I am going to review and page through Lex Arcana second edition from Acheron Games. Should all roads lead to this fantasy role playing game set in a world where the Roman Empire hasn't fallen? Or will you want to cast a hex on Lex because it makes you feel perplexed? Well, you're going to find out right after this. Howdy, 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 gang, and happy holidays. Welcome once again to the Duct Tape Studios. I'm Jeff McAleer, your host here at the Gaming Gang channel. As I mentioned in the open, today I am going to review and page through Lex Arcana second edition from Acheron Games. It is written by Marco Maggi and Francesco Nepatello with advice from Leo Colavini. The 304-page hardcover is available now. It's been out for a bit. Carries an MSRP of $55, or you can grab just the PDF alone over at DriveThruRPG for $24.99. All right. So, all that said, let's swing on over to the other camera because here I've got the core rulebook for Lex Arcana second edition. A few things to mention before we jump on in. First off, the fine folks over at Acheron Games did provide me with this review copy, but neither I nor anyone else have received any other sort of compensation for me to share this review with you. These days, it's important that you know that. I'll also be picture in picture up here, as I always am. So that means as we take a peek through, I'll be cutting off a little bit of the upper left portion of the book. Also, should mention we're not going to look at each and every page, but I do want to give you a good feel for what's in this core rulebook, as well as share my thoughts about the game with you as well. Lastly, there are a couple of adventures in this volume. I'm going to stay as spoiler free as I possibly can, but if you are a player and you're hoping that your game master is going to pick up Lex Arcana, then I would certainly recommend once we get to the adventure portion, tune on out. You don't want to have surprises ruined because you accidentally saw something in this video. Of course, if your game master is considering picking up Lex Arcana, tell them about this video so that they can make an informed buying decision. All right, let's jump on in. I'll get that die out of the way. Although you're going to see it again soon enough. First thing I do want to mention about the book is production quality is absolutely top notch. Really, really well done. The paper stock is really nice. There is a bit of a finish to the pages, so there is a little bit of glare. I know a lot of people out there prefer a matte finish. Thankfully, we don't have a lot of dark background throughout the book. Most of the background is this kind of off-white. So really, really spectacular artwork throughout. I am super impressed by Acheron Games and just the attention and detail they've put into this core rulebook. Big thumbs up for that. Okay, so as I pointed out in the opening, this is set in a timeline where the Roman Empire did not fall. So it's essentially our 5th century, which is when the Roman Empire eventually completely fell. But in the game, it is actually the 13th century. So their calendar is based upon the founding of Rome. So it is 13 centuries since the founding of Rome. So that's how the calendar works for the game world. Player characters take on the roles of custores, who the easiest way that I can present this is that they work for a state sanctioned organization that is essentially an ancient historical X-Files. It's kind of how I sum it up because the player characters go and they investigate strange phenomena, unusual occurrences, magic, possible rebellion within the empire. Also, they travel far and wide. And I found that to be very, very interesting. So the player characters are going to have 6 core attributes. And then we also have as kind of skills, and then we have specializations. Kind of have like a skill grouping. So we have like magic, we have combat. So the attributes are kind of standard, but I point out that I feel that Lex Arcana is more aimed towards more experienced role players. I probably wouldn't recommend Lex Arcana as like the first role playing game anyone ever plays or runs because there are some terminology throughout that people are going to find a little confusing. So, for one, this was originally in Italian. So, this has been translated and localized to English. There are a few issues with that. Not many, but a few, mainly grammatical errors or missing words in sentences throughout. But it's not super distracting because it doesn't happen too often throughout. But one thing that I think will kind of throw some people off, and personally, I think it kind of would stand in the way of me running this as effectively as I'd like, is that all of these different attributes and skills and things like that are referred to in Latin. So, as an example, we've got coordination, vigor, authority, intellect, reason, and sensibility. Those are our core attributes or virtues. But it's coordinatio, vigor is the same. Ictoritis, ingenium, ratio, and sensibilitas. And the same thing applies for the proficiencies or the skills. I gotta say, that's more proficiencies. Like combat is debello, demagia. Okay, magic, but it's just not as intuitive as I would like. And I get it. This is an Italian role playing game, and it is set in a fantasy version of ancient Rome. So it's not like, well, I want them to change it. I'm just pointing out it can be a little tricky. It just doesn't, you're like, oh, okay, I need you to make a DeBello roll. And a lot of players are going to be like, what? What is that? What do I need to roll here? So, but as I pointed out, artwork really, really nice throughout. The core mechanics of Lex Arcana are actually pretty easy to wrap your head around. There's some things that look much more complex than they actually are. There are some things going on here that'll be a little tricky as well. Once again, especially to newcomers, and that is what dice are going to roll for action resolution. So this essentially works on a difficulty threshold, or as we tend to refer to it in a lot of other games, challenge ratings or DCs. Now, keep in mind the difficulty levels and thresholds are lower than a D20 game because you're really not rolling a D20. So, as an example, let's say I need to make a vigor roll and my vigor score is 12. So, I can roll any dice combination that adds up to 12. So, I could roll a D12. I could roll 2D6s. I could roll 3D4, or I could roll a D8 and a D4. All of those combinations could add up to 12. So why would I roll certain dice in certain situations and other dice in other situations? And one aspect of the game that I think is very interesting is the fate roll. which in other games, we refer to this mechanic as an exploding die. So if you roll the highest number on all the dice that you roll, you get to roll them again. Or if you're rolling only one die, you get to roll it again and then add the total together. And if you roll the highest again, you roll it again and you'll keep rolling until you don't roll the highest number on the dice. So, as an example, if I were looking to say swing for the fences, maybe I'm trying to accomplish something that is nigh impossible or it's very, very difficult for me to possibly succeed. I would probably roll just one die because my chances of actually getting the highest number on it are greater than if I'm rolling a combination of dice. But let's say I'm rolling something that I actually have a good chance of succeeding at. I am probably going to roll multiple dice. So, as an example, maybe I'd want to roll 3 4-sided dice for that 12 because the lowest I could possibly get is 3. If I roll only a 12-sided die, it is possible for me to roll a 1. And there are degrees of success as well. So something that is a normal difficulty without any sort of modifications or anything like that is a 6. So I would need to roll a 6 or higher to succeed on whatever dice combination I'm working with. I also find it kind of interesting. Let's say I've got a 13 in my proficiency. I could just roll a 12-sided die and ignore that extra point. Simply because if I'm trying to total up 13, I'm gonna have to roll multiple dice. And maybe I want to have a better chance of that fate roll coming up. So it's all just, percentages, the odds of certain dice rolls. And for newcomers, people who are not, used to rolling a bunch of dice or computing dice combinations, it could be a little confusing. Character creation is actually not all that difficult, but it looks much more complex because you have a worksheet. So various different factors come into play when you're calculating your proficiencies. And then, of course, we've got specialties as well that might add a point to your proficiencies. So, as an example, if my player character is specializing in the gladius, the Roman short sword, and I get a +1, it would go to my debello score, my combat score. But you're going to have different modifications based on the province that you're from. You can choose or you can roll randomly, and you're assigning your points also. So you can custom craft the sort of player character you want to take on as opposed to just random rolls. Now there is another way for you to create your character that is far more random and pretty interesting as well, but of course it's even more time consuming. So this is our character sheet. So dual-sided as far as our character sheet. So let's jump into combat. Let's talk about combat. Actually, I should also point out we've got a variety of different classes, essentially occupations that you can take on. One of them is kind of secret. Most people don't realize that the Roman Empire employs assassins. So it is a character occupation that you can take on. So combat is pretty unique. It's very interesting and also pretty quickly resolved. But there are some like special abilities that can take place in combat that can make modifiers to combat. And some of them feel really unbalanced. And I don't know if it's because I just don't get it to click or if I'm misunderstanding something. So there are some things where you can it says it's every tempest, which is supposed to be a combat round. But there are some pretty powerful abilities that can be used once a tempest. So that means it's like every round, it's kind of weird. But it all boils down to most of your combatants are going to roll their debello, their combat. Add whatever specialties that they have that might come into play for that combat. So, as an example, let's say I've got a debello score of 12 and I've got my gladius that gives me a +1, so I'm at 13. And my opponent is going to roll their combat. Whoever's got the higher total is going to be the attacker. The lower is the defender. You're going to deduct the lower from the higher, and whatever is left over, there is a chart that's going to determine how you multiply the damage from the weapon to apply to the defender. And then, of course, you'll have armor that can reduce the damage as well. You also have that fate roll in combat. So it is possible that your combat can be very fast and very lethal, which I like. I definitely like that quite a bit. There are ways to stabilize a dying character and things along those lines too. So we're not talking like old school Renaissance, you know, Call of Cthulhu characters dying left and right. So as far as the magic, this is a low fantasy setting. This is a low magic setting, at least. And the vast majority of the magic that the player characters are going to have access to is going to be divination magic. There are a variety of different specializations. That is the magic that is practiced within the Roman Empire. Now, that doesn't mean that's the only kind of magic that's out there, but that is, for the most part, what the player characters are going to have access to. Also, got rules on improving your characters through experience, spending your experience. Spending the experience is a little more complex than I would like to see it. You actually assign modifiers to your various different categories. So, kind of bizarre. And in some ways, I feel that some of the unusual mechanics of the game just don't feel intuitive. They're almost like they're there just to be different as opposed to being there because they actually better the system itself. So here's an example of some pre-gens. Once again, very cool artwork throughout. So we essentially have each career, a male and a female pre-gen. Then we get a game master section here, which provides some pretty good information. As I mentioned before, the core mechanics to this are not difficult to wrap your head around. Sometimes it's just a little bit more of the presentation and the localization that sort of stands in the way. As I was also pointing out before, this is a low magic setting, and the magic is essentially ritualistic magic. You're not casting earthquake, you're not just animating the dead. All right, let's get on to the bestiary and NPCs. One thing that I think is very cool in Lex Arcana is the approach to the NPCs. So we have a section here, which is part of the bestiary essentially, and it's different kinds of NPCs that you would encounter. And based on what they would specialize in, it'll tell you how many dice you would roll. So you're not going to sit there and you don't need to have all of the NPCs, different attributes, and proficiencies and things like that. It's just, okay, so you might be rolling a D8. So D8 is probably someone who's relatively well trained. So certain things you might be rolling just one D8 for them to succeed. You might get two dice or three dice. So I thought that was pretty interesting. So you get like a DV, which tells you what dice value that you would use. And I found that to be very, very interesting. So you'll notice these stat blocks are not huge stat blocks. Now, these are animals here. And you might be saying, well, geez, Jeff, aren't we going to get some images? Oh, these are just animals that you know what they look like. But when we start getting into the fantastical creatures, now you're going to get artwork for each and every one of these. And this isn't just a rehash of your typical monster manual sort of creatures. We really do have the influence of not only Roman mythology, but Greek mythology as well. And as you can see, there are quite a lot of them. Then we're going to get to the point where we have a section about the world of Lex Arcana. I like the fact that we get images of the various different weapons. I've always been a fan of that. So we're going to wrap up with a couple of adventures. And here's another kind of odd thing about this book. The adventures themselves, and I want to point out this is kind of one of these scene-based role-playing games, which we see a lot of these days. And you're essentially going from scene to scene to scene. So, of course, very linear for the most part. But strangely enough, these adventures, sometimes there's some kind of big jumps in logic. Sometimes the assumption is just the player characters are going to automatically succeed at things that they shouldn't automatically be succeeding at. So the weird thing is the adventures themselves, the stories, the plot lines are actually really interesting. But I think most game masters would need to kind of tear them down and build them back up a little bit, not completely from scratch, but to a certain extent. Because, like I said, sometimes leading from scene to another scene takes just a huge assumption what the player characters are going to do. And one thing, those of you out there who have played or run role playing games, especially run role playing games, knows for a fact your players never do what you expect them to do. So, but once again, I found the adventures to be very interesting. That I could see having fun running them and my gang having a good time playing them. But like I said, it just once again, it just doesn't feel intuitive. And it almost sometimes, with some aspects of the adventures, as if the players are being shoehorned into doing something that wouldn't maybe come naturally to them. Then we're going to finish up with some game tools. We've got our player characters index, and that is the core rulebook for Lex Arcana. Let me swing on over to the other camera because I'm going to share some final thoughts as well as my review score. Got to point out, there's a lot to Lex Arcana that I really, really like. Production quality, artwork. I think there's tons of content in this book. I mean, you can really, really go to town with what's in this book here. This is not, even though there is a good amount of additional content that has been published for this role playing game, you're going to get a lot of gaming out of this single volume itself. There's no need for you to have to go buy a monster manual or game master's guide or anything like that. It's all self contained. Mechanically, I think mechanics of the game pretty easy to wrap your head around. Although things come across as being confusing, they're not. It's just not as intuitive as I would like to see. Once again, this is a European role playing game. And if you're familiar with, say, The Dark Eye, that is very different mechanically than what we're used to seeing in the States as well. And actually has quite a bit of crunch and quite a bit of like dice rolling in it. So this is certainly nowhere near the complexity level, at least in my opinion, of The Dark Eye, but it is unusual. It is different. There are some localization issues. There are some grammatical errors, some missing words here and there that kind of stand out. You're kind of like, it's like, let me read that sentence for a third time because I'm just not understanding it. And then all of a sudden you're like, oh, it should have had this word in it. That's what it's missing. But I like the world that this is set in. I think the adventures are very interesting, although I would change how they're structured as well. A lot to really like, and some things that I kind of scratch my head a little bit. As I pointed out a few times, this is certainly not the first role playing game that should be added to anyone's collection. But if you have some experience, then I certainly do recommend checking this out if you are interested in a low magic fantasy Roman Empire X-Files. Very unique. Personally, I think some folks are going to like this far more than the review score I give it. And other folks are going to feel, geez, Jeff, you're being kind of generous. But in my opinion, for my gang, for my use, I give Lex Arcana's core rulebook, the second edition, a 7.5 out of 10. I certainly recommend it. I like it. I'm intrigued by it. And there are some things that left me scratching my head. So there is that. All right. That is it for this time out. If you like the video, by all means, please give it a quick thumbs up. Subscribe to the Gaming Gang channel if you haven't already. And if you do subscribe, ding that bell. Will not only let you know when I upload videos such as this review, it'll also inform you when my live stream, the Gaming Gang Dispatch, airs Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday evenings right here on YouTube at 7 p.m. Central. And of course, when you're not watching videos on the Gaming Gang channel, be sure to visit thegaminggang.com for all latest in tabletop gaming news, reviews, and a whole lot more that you won't find here on the YouTube channel. All right, happy holidays to all of you out there. Thank you so much for taking some time out of your busy life to check out this review. And here's hoping each and every one of you gets to enjoy plenty of great gaming. Your gang. Oh, hey, you're still here. That's okay. You don't have to leave just yet. In fact, why don't you subscribe to the Gaming Gang channel right here, or take a peek at the latest live stream, or even find out what YouTube recommends you check out from the channel. And of course, I'm Jeff McAleer. Thanks again for watching.